And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Kent Myers. I promise you Mick Cornett will be back next week. I know you'll be anxious to have him back, as will I. Today we're going to do something very interesting for our viewers. We're going to have an update from Washington about what's going on in our nation's capital and how that impacts what happens here in Oklahoma. We're going to have 4th District Congressman Tom Cole join us to talk about the Iraq War, to talk about some of the hurricane relief, and to talk about some of our local political races as well. I think you'll find it interesting. We hope you will stay with us after we take this brief break, and we'll visit with the Honorable Tom Cole, 4th District Congressman from Oklahoma. You're watching The Verdict. We'll see you in just a minute.
For one Oklahoma-based company, success didn't happen overnight. Initially, the days were long, 80-hour weeks common. As we grew, we wanted to share our success, and the ideals of corporate and civic responsibility found a welcome home. Today, we're the largest investor in the Sooner State and a source for exciting, new, high-quality jobs. We're Chesapeake Energy, committed to building a better Oklahoma.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality, assistance, and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Hi, I'm Court Diffie. With all of the change that has taken place in the car industry in the past decade here in Oklahoma, it's hard to find a family-run business anymore. One of the things that makes us different, that if you visit any one of our 3 locations, you're going to find one of our family members there ready to help you. Does that really make any difference? We really believe it does. So I invite you to come out and experience the Diffie family difference and decide for yourself.
Welcome back to The Verdict. I'm Kent Myers, and we're pleased today to have the Honorable Tom Cole join us. Tom is the Congressman from the 4th District. He is joining us again on The Verdict to talk about what's going on in Washington. Tom is a graduate of Grinnell College. For his undergraduate work, he got his master's degree at Yale University, his PhD from the University of Oklahoma. He has served as a political strategist and consultant for a number of years. He's in the middle of his 2nd term in Congress, and he has the distinction of being an enrolled member of the Chickasaw tribe and is the only Native American serving in either house of Congress. And Tom, thank you for joining us again on The Verdict. It's always a pleasure to have you.
It's great to be here, Ken. Thank you.
I noted when I was getting ready for your show that on your website, I didn't know this until I consulted your website, but you're on the House Rules Committee.
That's correct.
Well, that means something to me, but I'm not quite sure what it should mean. Can tell us about your service on the House Rules Committee?
Well, the Rules Committee is really the most powerful committee in the House of Representatives. Every piece of legislation that's going to reach the floor has to go through the Rules Committee and get a positive vote. And the Rules Committee decides the conditions under which that legislation will be debated. That is, what amendments will be in order, whether the bill will be immune from points of order, the length of the debate, the amount of time, the scheduling. So it is an extraordinarily important committee in that regard. It puts me in a position to have something to say about literally anything other than just focusing in 2 or 3 areas. So it gives you a lot of latitude to impact legislation.
Is there any particular legislation that has come through that your membership on the House Rules Committee has affected or
Well,
has
several
influenced?
things, actually. Some of them are parochial and specific to Oklahoma. I think of the memorial for the USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor. Been trying for years to get that done, hadn't been able to get it done, and on the Rules Committee I was able to slot it into a bill as an amendment that was accepted by the major author. They usually do that when you suggest amendments from the Rules Committee. And so we got that through, and that project's now well underway. in more national areas, I'm a big advocate of higher ed programs and really common ed called TRIO and Gear Up. They're very important to Oklahoma. And I'm in a position there and have been to defend those programs. There are people that want to eliminate the funding for them. There are people that want to change the structure, the formula whereby we fund them, which would adversely affect Oklahoma. I've been able so far to keep that from happening. So it actually gives you a lot of latitude to play an important role in a whole variety of issues.
Now, you acquire that position on the Rules Committee by appointment by the Speaker?
That's correct. And when I accepted it, I also was given the right to carry the rule, which means to be the first speaker for the appropriations bill for defense, which is extraordinarily important in my district with Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill, and also for the authorization bill, that is what says what you can actually spend the money on. So it lets me play an even stronger role on defense issues than I was able to play on the Armed Services Committee.
I don't know that it has to do with your 2.5 years service, but it seems to me, just as an outside Oklahoman looking in, that Oklahoma's position in the defense industry area with Fort Sill and Tinker just continue to get stronger.
Well, a lot of people can and should take credit for that. First and foremost, the people that work at the bases themselves. These are just superb facilities, and both the military personnel and the civilian population and the surrounding communities have been extraordinarily supportive. And we did very well in BRAC. Oklahoma finished number 5 in the country in terms of pickups from BRAC out of the 50 states. My congressional district finished number 4 out of the 435 districts. Most of the gains were inside that district, particularly at Fort Sill. So we did well. But again, we've had a congressional delegation on both sides of the aisle for many years that's focused on this. We've got a state that is very pro-military and very anxious to have these facilities. We got good cooperation from the state government as well. Governor Henry was very helpful. Governor Fallon, Lieutenant Governor Fallon also played a role in this. So a lot of Oklahomans can be very proud of the job they played. I was very fortunate to be in a role to play a role as well.
Well, it was a role well played, obviously.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about something that's not quite as pleasant a topic, and what one writer, I don't take credit for it, called the delay distraction. Representative Tom DeLay, I guess Majority Leader in the House, has now been indicted the second time, and this time I think for money laundering. And a lot, he's had to, I guess, abdicate his duties at least temporarily until some of these legal problems get worked out. How has that affected your work, and how has that affected how you operate in the House?
Well, it is a distraction. Mr. DeLay, to his credit, did the right thing. Our party rules are very clear. If you're indicted, you need to step down. He did that, so he no longer exercises the authority and sway that he did. We had to have a mid-term shuffle of our leadership. Our current whip, Roy Blunt, took over the role of Majority Leader in addition to his current duties. And then David Dreyer, who's actually the chairman of the Rules Committee where I serve, has stepped up to take on additional duties, and Eric Cantor, our deputy whip. So it's like having to change your lineup in the middle of a football game. It's something you'd prefer not to do when you've got a player that has to go out. Having said that, I think it remains to be seen whether or not there's much substance to these charges. Obviously, Mr. DeLay rejects them out of hand, and there's a strong feeling on the Republican side that this is the criminalization of what's pretty normal political activity. So we'll see what happens. I hope we have a speedy trial. I think that's the most important thing that should occur. And then, if Mr. DeLay is found to be innocent, he should be allowed to resume his duties. If he's not, well, obviously, he'll be forced to resign from the House.
Has this changed your duties within the party?
Well, I think I'm on the whip team. I serve as a deputy whip, so it puts an extra burden on us. We have to produce the votes to get important pieces of legislation passed. That means rounding up Republican votes, reaching over when we can on the Democratic side. There's no question that Mr. DeLay, who had been whip before he was Majority Leader, is very effective at getting that done. So it's like losing Adrian Peterson. It's everybody else has to step up and do a little bit more.
Let me change the subject.
Sure.
Let's talk about Iraq. I know you've, I think it was March, but you've relatively recently completed your 4th trip to Iraq. Tell our viewers about what impressions you have. How do you think things are going?
Well, there's no question it's a difficult and challenging situation. I always tell people the first thing is I wish every American could go, because first of all, regardless of their position on the war, they'd come back extraordinarily proud of the men and the women that are serving there. Our people are unbelievably professional and skillful, incredibly brave, and I think they're doing a mission that they can be very proud of, and they are. As a matter of fact, we hear a lot of talk about enlistment rates. We don't hear much about re-enlistment rates. They're actually at an all-time high. We've never done so well in re-enlistment, which tells you that the people that are serving, I think, believe in the mission that they're about. I begin with the premise the world is better off, Iraq is better off without Saddam Hussein. Having that kind of guy who came close to getting nuclear weapons in '81, the Israelis took him out in their raid on the Iraqi reactor, and in '91, where we were told after the war, according to the UN, they were within 6 months of developing nuclear weapons. That kind of guy sitting on top of the world's second largest oil reserves needs to be removed, and not just for external purposes. He did launch 2 wars that cost over 1 million lives in the Middle East, but he also killed between '91 and the time of the American liberation, and I think of it that way, of Iraq, 400,000 Iraqis. One of the things you don't hear much about are the 270 some odd mass grave sites that have been uncovered since the Americans have arrived. I think some of that's going to become more evident when Saddam Hussein is on trial. Having said that, this really is the central front in the war on terror. It's not just dealing with the Iraqi insurgency, most of which is Sunni, old Baathists and Fedayeen, sort of diehard Saddamist, if you will, but also attracted from around the Middle East suicide bombers. Most of the suicide bombers in Iraq, matter of fact, we haven't been able to identify any that were Iraqi. They're mostly not from Iraq, which tells you that we are drawing in the kinds of people we want to deal with there.
Yeah, excuse me for breaking in. We need to get to a break because I want to come back to that after the break. You're watching Congressman Tom Cole on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Leaving it 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go. Wiggins had to do the kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
RSM McGladry. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. RSM McGladry. In Oklahoma City, the phone number is 405-843-5311.
Welcome back to The Verdict. I'm Kent Myers, and with us today is the Honorable Tom Cole, representative from the 4th District. Tom, when we had to take the break, you were talking about something that I have really had a curiosity about, and that is the origin of the insurgents we see in Iraq causing all kinds of havoc all the time, particularly when we get close to an election or something. Tell us a little more about that.
The insurgency is difficult to deal with because it's made up of 4 different elements. One element is just criminals. Frankly, Saddam emptied all the prisons in Iraq. Some of those were political prisoners, but a lot of them were just ordinary murderers, thugs, and thieves. So they're out there running loose. Then you've got the remnants of Saddam's regime, which is almost like dealing with the old Gestapo or the old SS. I mean, that's how they kept power inside the country. So these are pretty tough, brutal, well-trained customers. And we actually began running into them during the effort to liberate Iraq on the second or third day. It's the big surprise of the military people with these irregular units that they were fighting, in addition to the Army, and they're still in the field. Then you've got what's legitimately or illegitimately a sort of Sunni national resistance. The Sunnis basically ran the country. They're about 20 or 25%. Saddam was Sunni. They're very worried that, frankly, people will do to them what they did to the Shia and to the Kurds and
what
the
goes around comes
That's
around.
right, and there's a lot of fear about that. And then finally, you've got what I'd call the transnational terrorists, the Zarqawis, the Al-Qaeda elements that are really part of the global war on terror. They're all in there mixed up together, and they're all, frankly, have an alliance of convenience. They have very different aims, but the two main ones are the Fedayeen and the transnational terrorists. Those are the ones you worry about. You think over time you might be able to co-opt the regular Sunnis into the government, and there's some signs that could happen. And then obviously the criminals are criminals, and you want to deal with them over time. So it's a multifaceted insurgency movement. It's confined to about 4 provinces. Most of the country is pretty secure. I mean, there's 18 provinces in Iraq. There's very little problems in 13 or 14 of them, are relatively little. Most of them are in the so-called Sunni triangle that people hear so much about.
You hear the phrase exit strategy for our troops in Iraq. In any way you want to phrase it, how do you see this coming to an end for our troop involvement there?
Well, I think in the end, what our aim is to have a government that can defend itself, that can stand up and deal with its insurgency and defend its borders. I think we've actually made a lot of progress in that area. A year ago, Americans were suffering roughly 2/3 of the casualties that were inflicted in Iraq. Today, it's about 20-25%. Most of the casualties are actually of Iraqis. There is an Iraqi army that's coming into being. It's increasingly effective. There's no shortage of recruits for it, but it's an army that's being formed in the crucible of war in a very difficult situation. We normally don't commit troops into combat until they've been in the service anywhere from 2.5, 3 years to 4 years. These guys are in combat, in 90, 180 days, and so they don't have the same professionalism that American forces do. But they have a lot of determination. We think they're coming on. I think you have standing up a security, and the other thing is the political process. We forget that 8 million Iraqis did come out and vote in January. At that point, American public opinion was very optimistic, and we saw this tremendous desire on the part of most people in Iraq to participate in the democratic process. We're going to see elections next week in October and again in December. And so I think in the end, you need a stable government that really reflects popular will. You need a domestic mechanism, and I think over time you'll see American troop strength come down. Actually, I think it'll begin to happen sometime in the spring or summer of next year, but it's hard to predict. I mean, the enemy gets a vote in this arrangement.
It's not a unilateral decision, is it?
That's correct. And I think that's something that Americans need to think about. The Iraqi government wants us there. You don't look at the television screen and see demonstrations in the street in Baghdad that say Americans go home. That doesn't mean they don't want us to leave when our job's done. They clearly do, but they recognize the need, and our people ought to recognize that we're there because most people have asked us to come and be there in this difficult time in their history. We didn't win our independence without a French army and a French fleet, which we like to forget, but it's true. There were almost as many Frenchmen at Yorktown as there were American Continental soldiers, and if there hadn't been a French fleet, Cornwallis would have never been bottled up. So we're playing a very important role, I think, in the emergence of a new and hopefully democratic country.
As we said earlier, you've made 4 trips now to Iraq. So let me ask you a personal question. Do you have any, when you make that kind of trip, do you have any concern for your personal safety?
Well, they look after us very well. I mean, you're in body armor, but when you go to Fallujah, Tikrit, or you're moving around Baghdad, you have some concern, but that's pretty insignificant compared to the guys that are there for 12 months at a time. I mean, I'm there for a long weekend or maybe a week. They're there in hazardous duty. So if you're going to be supportive of this effort, and I have been, I think you owe it to people to get over there as much as you possibly can, see it firsthand, and certainly, try to understand what the guys on the ground, young men and women on the ground, are facing and dealing with.
It certainly enables you to talk to your constituents about what's going on, having been there.
It does. I remember one story which brings a lot of this home to me. I remember asking a young sergeant, 22, 23 years old, actually my first trip, and at that point it looked like, maybe we wouldn't find the weapons of mass destruction we thought we would, and we didn't, not to the same level we thought we would. And I asked him about that. I said, well, given that fact, was it worth coming? And he said, well, sir, I think, they had a lot of dual-use technology and there were illegal weapons. And I said, no, we haven't found what we thought we were going to find. What do you think? And he said, well, I tell you what, he answered my question with a question. He looked at me and said, sir, have you ever seen a mass grave? And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, well, I have. And he said, and you haven't seen anything until you've seen hundreds of women wailing as bodies are coming out one at a time, wondering, is that their brother, is that their father, is that their son, is that their sister? He said, you see something like that, you wonder why the whole world wasn't here 10 years ago.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Let me change the subject real quickly to our state political races.
Sure.
There's some things we didn't get to talk about today. Time is just moving too quickly, but it's fascinating conversation with you. Let's focus on the governor's race, and particularly on the Republican side. How do you see that shaping out?
I think Ernest Istook is a very strong candidate. I have a lot of respect for Bob Sullivan and Senator Williamson, both of whom I know well and think highly of. But I think you got to make Ernest the favorite in that. He's won 3 state house races and 7 races for Congress. He's an established vote getter. He's an excellent candidate. He's going to start off with a strong base of support, so I would be surprised if he's not ultimately the nominee.
There was an argument last time about what effect Gary Richardson had. Did he take votes away from Brad Henry or from Steve Largent?
Oh, there's no question he took votes away from Steve Largent.
Yeah. If he comes into the race, do you see that affecting Istook perhaps?
Well, Gary's a strong candidate. Again, he was a self-financer operating outside the party structure and still got 14 or 15% of the vote. He ran 2 great congressional races, nearly ended up in Congress in the old 2nd District in the late 70s or 1980. So, I have a lot of respect for him, but no, I think Ernest would be very tough to beat. I think he knows how to win elections. I think he's going to be a very, very strong candidate for the nomination. I think he'll be very strong in the fall.
Tom, we're going to have to interrupt at this time. Thank you so much for coming.
You
It's
bet.
been a pleasure. We've been visiting with the Honorable Tom Cole, the Congressman from the 4th Legislative District here in Oklahoma. And Tom's website is www.house.gov/Cole if you want to visit directly with him through his website. Thanks very much for coming.
Enjoyed being here.
I'll be right back. You're watching The Verdict.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a plug nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Myers. Next week, Mick Cornett will be back. Thanks to Tom Cole for joining us and telling us about what's been going on in Washington. Next week, we'll be talking about leadership, Oklahoma City. Please join us on our website, theverdict.tv, and let us know what you'd like to see. We'll see you next week.
The preceding program was produced by the Production Services Group at Cox Communications, exclusively for the Cox Channel.